Yeah, there we go. All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. So we are back on hopefully, inshallah, maybe the last day, at least in our tafsir, with these ayat that we were doing. Let's see. إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. قال هذا يوم ينفع الصادقين صدقهم لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه ذلك الفوز العظيم. But yesterday, while I was actually doing this, I think I kind of went really fast over this hadith. Let's see. خرج مسلم عن ابن عباس قال قام فينا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم خطيبا بموعظة فقال يا أيها الناس إنكم تحشرون إلى الله حفاة عراة غرلا كما بدأنا أول خلق نعيده وعدا علينا إنا كنا فاعلين ألا وإن أول الخلائق يكسى يوم القيامة إبراهيم عليه السلام ألا وإنه سيجاء برجال من أمتي فيؤخذ بهم ذات الشمال فأقول يا ربي أصحابي فيقال إنك لا تدري ما أحدثوا بعدك فأقول كما قال العبد الصالح وكنت عليهم شهيدا ما دمت فيهم فلما توفيتني كنت أنت الرقيب عليهم وأنت على كل شيء شهيد إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم قال فيقال لي إنهم لم يزالوا مدبرين مرتدين على أعقابهم منذ فارقتهم. So this hadith was narrated in Sahih Muslim based off Ibn Abbas that the Prophet ﷺ had stood in a ceremony basically, and khatiban bimaw'idha. In other words, when you're talking about khatiban bimaw'idha, was it a Friday? Was it no? He just wanted to give them a certain oration, a certain reminder. What was it? فقال, and he said, يا أيها الناس, O people, you will be resurrected and you will be gathered to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where you will be barefooted, naked, not circumcised, and quotes the ayah as how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created the creation in the first time. It will be brought again together, and of course, nu'iduhu, meaning it will be resurrected in the same creation that it was created the first time. وعدا علينا. This is a promise. We promise all the people. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, why that علينا, that is basically a word or a pronoun in Lugha Arabiya to resemble magnificence, to resemble honor. This is not to resemble that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is plural whatsoever, but this is to resemble magnificence. إِنَّا كُنَّا فَاعِلِينَ. This is an affirmation. We are for sure going to make that as something that will happen. أَلَا وَإِنَّ أَوَّلَ الْخَلَائِقِ يُكْسَى. Why did he say, verily the first one, that on Judgment Day, to be clothed is going to be Ibrahim alayhi salam. Why? Because he had mentioned that people are going to be hufatan, uratan, ghurla, that they will be barefooted, naked, and not circumcised. So when you look at hufa, that's to tell us there's nothing there. It's exactly the way that you were first created. Nothing on you physically, and nothing on you to cover you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything is exposed. Everything is exposed and everybody is exposed. In another hadith, Sayyida Aisha said, while she was surprised, she said, men and women, they're going to see each other. And the Prophet ﷺ responds, Al-amru ashaddu min dhalik. That the matter at that time is going to be way more magnificent than anybody caring to look at another person and look at their private parts or see anything or even care about anything. Everybody is in a time, and at a time, all they're thinking about is how surreal and how magnificent and how scary that they are in a situation where they had thought that this was not going to happen, and now they see it right before their eyes. They thought the judgment day was not going to happen. They thought it was some kind of a lie, some kind of a myth. They thought it was nothing but a made-up story, and they thought that this was nothing that they would have to prepare for whatsoever. So now they see it right before their eyes. Now it is as in Surah Al-Takathur. It is now Ayn al-Yaqeen. It is now Ayn al-Yaqeen. It's something that no one could deny or even doubt whatsoever. It is Ayn al-Yaqeen. It is what their eyes could see, what their bodies could feel. There's no way that they could doubt any of this. This is real. And on that day, Prophet Ibrahim would be the first to be covered. ألا وإنه سيجاء برجال من أمتي. A group of men from my nation, the Prophet ﷺ says, will be brought, and then they would be taken from the left and from the right, and then he would be bewildered, and he would say, Ya Rabbi Ashabi, Ya Allah, these are part of my companions, they're part of my nation, that is. And then it would be said, you don't know what they had done after you had died, after you had left. And then he would say, as al-abdu salih, then he would say, as the pious servant, or as the pious servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is, Prophet Isa alayhi salam would say, وَكُنْتُ عَلَيْهِمْ شَهِيدًا مَا دُمْتُ فِيهِمْ. And I was a witness, and I was supervising, and I was capable of seeing what they were doing when I was amongst them. فَلَمَّا تَوَفَّيْتَنِي, when you had risen me, or when you had put me to sleep, or when I was basically then away and not present amongst them, you were the one, الرَّقِيبَ عَلَيْهِمْ. You were the one supervising everything. You were the one to see everything. And you were the one that was witnessing everything. So, إِن تُعَذِّبْهُمْ, if you decide to punish them, they are your servants. And if you decide to forgive them, فَإِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ, you are the one that is self-efficient and most wise. And then he would be told, لَمْ يَزَالُوا مُدْبِرِينَ, they just turned away. They just left the religion. You had only seen them amongst you that they were part of faith. But after you had left, they rejected the faith and they left, and they decided to take a different path. Since you had left them, they stayed away from the path of faith. Now, when you look at this ayah, إِن تُعَذِّبْهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ عِبَادُكَ. If you were to hear the word in, if. Now, when you see if in Lugha Arabiya or in, this is basically called that word of shart. It's a conditional word, okay? It's a preposition of condition. So if you have a condition there is supposed to be فعل الشرط and there's supposed to be جواب الشرط. There's supposed to be the condition and there's supposed to be that what is basically the alternative to what you had basically set as a condition. So he basically said, إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك. If you were to punish them, well, they're your servants. In other words, I can't be there to concede or there to somehow become the person to intermediate whatsoever. In that sense, إنهم عبادك, they're your servants. I can't be the one to in any shape or form ask you or even be there in their defense. إنهم عبادك, they're your servants. وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. And if you wanted to forgive them, you are Al-Aziz Al-Hakim. Notice that he said Al-Aziz Al-Hakim and not Al-Ghafur Al-Rahim. Why? Because Al-Aziz actually means that Prophet Isa alayhi salam recognizes and knows, and he is the Prophet of Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. That the Lord Almighty does not forgive that people would associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he would forgive any other sin. And since these people had committed shirk, then they would not be fit and be fit or fit within the category of Al-Ghafur Al-Rahim, but they would basically have to recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Aziz. Al-Aziz. What is Al-Aziz? Al-Aziz comes from the root Azaza, which actually means that basically support, to give support, to give power, to empower. That's Azaza. But Al-Aziz, the one that has all the support, the one that is self-empowered, that is self-efficient. He's not in need of anybody's worship. In other words, you are wired to need to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not actually in need of the people's worship. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not gain any type of magnificence by people turning to him, but people will gain honor by turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because you are wired to need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you are basically created with ruh, aql, and jasad, and body. You've got the body that basically, in order to continue, it needs food, it needs energy, it needs food, and therefore you depend on him for rizq. Your brain, you're trying, yes, you're given the tool to probably experiment, to figure some things out, but to understand the world completely, your brain is limited to how much it can, it can study, or it can experiment, or it can even fathom or comprehend. So therefore, ilm is a lot more magnificent, or at least is a lot wider than studying matter in motion. So for ilm, you also need wattaqullah wa ya'allimkumullah. You would need the inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because ilm, remember, we always say this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically told us that يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسُ وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَىٰ. They would follow speculation and they would follow their own whims / emotions, desires. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَىٰ. When we're speaking about epistemology, when we're speaking about resources of ilm, we can have certain things that are probably based on maybe experiment, empirical knowledge, or perhaps maybe different sciences that we could probably study by maybe using our own senses in understanding the world, etc. But then there's one ilm, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى. There's one ilm that you cannot get. Yes, science can give you certain information, can give you certain tips to understanding the world, but there's one ilm that could only have one source. That is the Lord Almighty, and that's why he said, وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَبِّهِمُ الْهُدَى, and that is basically al-wahi itself. There's no other way that you can get certain ulum, certain inspirations, but through divine. Certain ulum, certain sciences, you can study empirical, experiment, you can dissect, you can do different things to basically use your emotions or probably using your mind to understand and probably see the paradigm of things. But there are certain ulum that basically are given to you through only al-wahi. And that wahi is not given to me or you. That wahi is given to the prophets and the messengers to help you make a sense of this world. Now, this ilm is basically one thing that helps you recognize and make sense of a lot of the information that is considered as the missing link. Why am I created? Who created me? Where am I going? The purpose of life, who you are, and what's behind life. These three things. You could only get it through al-wahi, but you can get some research done to understand that there's some magnificent power that's putting all these pieces together, but science does not lead you necessarily to God. Science does not lead you necessarily to God. In other words, human intelligence cannot necessarily lead you to God, but it can lead you to knowing that this creation was not created in coincidence, cannot necessarily create itself, because it basically needs a creator that is beyond the creation. Okay, so that's why when we look at Al-Aziz, that's to let us know that you need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not in need of our worship. But we are wired in our brain, in our heart, and in our body to need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Aziz, He's not in need of us, but we are in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Hakim. Why Al-Hakim? Al-Hakim is basically the all-wise. So why Al-Hakim and not Al-Khabir? Al-Hakim because the Lord Almighty is basically right now the judge, Al-Malik. Right now, people had been resurrected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right now, they're coming to meet their fate, and what they are basically, what they had basically presented and what they are basically right now coming forth is basically the fate, or at least the accountability that they will be held accountable for, which basically what they had presented previously in dunya. So Al-Hakim, basically, you are the one to be the magnificent judge, and you are the one to rule in wisdom, in what makes justice, in what makes as the complete, the complete fair judgment. So you would be Al-Hakim. You would be Al-Hakim, the most wise, the most basically just in this situation and in all situations. Let's see. روى النسائي عن أبي ذر قال قام النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حتى أصبح بآية والآية إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. Abu Dhar had said that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم قام النبي. What is قام النبي? That the Prophet ﷺ did قيام الليل the whole night. I want you to look at this one. The whole night until dawn with just one ayah. So after Al-Fatiha إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. Repeat it on and on and on and on and on till Fajr. That's all he would read, just repeating the same ayah. Same ayah. I want you to recognize one thing. If you look at dhikr, dhikr contains a lot of repetition. And in fact, it's so strange that as human beings, and as you would see the world around you, it's all based on repetition. Everything is based on repetition. There's no way that you can make a change on your body or on your heart or perhaps on even spiritually unless you are consistent with a certain regimen. There's no way. That's the way your body is designed. In fact, that's the way the whole universe is designed. You could see that the sun rotates in a repetitive mode. You could see the world. You could see the atoms, the electrons, the protons, your body, the blood cycle, the heart is pumping, the heart, the way it works. Everything works in a repetitive paradigm, in a repetitive action, in a repetitive mode. And that's the same thing. Even for you, every single day, you basically do the same thing over and over, over and over. That's basically to let us know that repetition is key to making you basically change, to making you achieve. There's no way that you can reach success unless you are committed to the same action. Whether we're speaking about exercising, if you want to really be successful, it has to be the longer the term with your commitment, the more you will see the effect. Same thing with your education. The longer you stay in that commitment in your education, the farther you will get in your successes. And that's the same thing even when it comes to ibadah. When you look at university, the most important thing that, for example, that you would get in university is not necessarily the sciences. It's not necessarily that. It's your ability, your commitment to stay within a program and to stay committed and be fixated. That's the most thing that you would achieve in going to school. The most thing that you would achieve in going to school is to learn how to stay committed, is to learn how to stay focused. That's the most thing. When you look at ibadah, it's the same thing. When you talk about khushu', can you stay focused on the dhikr and not let your mind think about other things? How focused can you stay? How committed can you be on your salah 5 times a day? How committed can you be on the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked you to stay committed to? How committed can you be in being committed to whether it's your deen or whether it's your health or whether it's in your mind or whether it's in your family or whether it's in your wealth? How committed can you be? That commitment is basically that area that will not only get you into successes in this dunya, but that commitment will also get you the successes in Jannah, in al-akhirah. It's the commitment. There's no running away, and you cannot expect the world to somehow redirect or change the paradigm and let me probably change the things and how things function. There's no way that you can be stubborn with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You cannot be stubborn with your own body. You cannot be stubborn with the things that you would see in nature, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. You cannot expect the world to change to what you want it to be. But you have to learn how the world was created, and you have to adjust and compromise / عبودية. عبودية to who? To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not عبودية to yourself, because that would be enslavement. Don't be enslaved to yourself. Don't be enslaved to your whims. Don't be enslaved to other people, but be free from being enslaved to them by enslaving yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only. And that's why you would get Al-Aziz Al-Hakim. So the Prophet ﷺ doing this repetition, it is to tell us and to teach us there are certain things that by doing in a repetitive mode, that it programs your brain, it programs your heart, it programs your soul, it programs not you only as an individual, but even the people around you. They will also get the inspiration to follow that paradigm, to follow that programming that you are setting. By you setting a certain program, you will inspire others to basically follow along. We're human beings, and just like animals, the cat, you would give it its litter box, you put it in a certain place, and it would know this is where I'm supposed to do my business. It would know what to do. If we're speaking about a cat, we're speaking about certain animals getting programmed, and human beings the same way we're capable of getting programmed. That's the same thing. The Prophet ﷺ had said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. You would not be a believer until your whims / your programming basically goes in parallel with the principles, with the inspiration, with the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent onto Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Simple. That's the simplest way that you can explain Islam. Learning how to reprogram your body, your brain, your whims, your identity to basically fit what La ilaha illallah is all about. So repeating certain ayat, repeating certain dhikr, repeating certain behavior is to basically create an identity in you, an identity that involves your brain, your heart, your soul, all together. Now, the scholars actually had differences of opinions in regards to إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك, whether Prophet Isa عليه السلام, whether he was, I guess, pitying the people. Is this a demonstration of pity, or was Prophet Isa alayhi salam not necessarily demonstrating pity over the people that had basically claimed to be following him? Or is this demonstrating that he is submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and basically taslim, it's submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he's basically asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically from the torments of hellfire, from his punishment, because he knows that his Prophet Isa alayhi salam, he knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not forgive the sins of anybody that had denied the Lord Almighty. You denied the Lord Almighty, you denied Judgment Day, you denied the revelation, then you basically had turned away completely and you had chosen that path. So some scholars had said, in tu'adhibhum, this hum right there, the pronoun, that is, let me translate it, if you are to punish them. So the pronoun them, i.e. the hum, he said this is to basically refer to whoever had died in disbelief, okay? And the hum, if you are to forgive them, the word them, and to forgive them, the pronoun them, is basically referring to those that had repented before death. Al-Qurtubi comments and he says, وَهَذَا حَسَنٌ. And he said, in other words, this is most likely the most accurate interpretation, that in tu'adhibhum, that the pronoun hum here is referring to those that had basically died in disbelief, and the hum in taghfir lahum is basically referring to those that had repented before death. Okay, well, why? Because Prophet Isa alayhi salam knows that there's no maghfirah for a disbeliever, because that would basically mean if a person had chosen disbelief, that means they had completely embraced a completely different concept, a completely different path, and basically denied everything that this whole world is basically based on, which is La ilaha illallah, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the one that's giving the rizq. He's the one that gave al-hayat, death, life, death, gave the rizq, gave every power in this whole world. To deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically means that you had denied each and every single provision, each and every single energy, each and every single power that was given to you. Then, in other words, the energy, the power, the potentials that all were given to you to give you the test, you had invested it in other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave it to you in order to find the Lord Almighty, but then you decided to take a different path. Okay, so this is, and of course, I did want to say that قَرَأَ جَمَاعَ فَإِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Some had actually read it as al-Ghafur Rahim, and here al-Qurtubi said, and this is not min al-Mus'haf. I would want to comment on this one for a bit, because it can happen that you can have manuscripts, even if they're Quranic manuscripts, that may have typos. Okay, is it possible? It is possible. Just like this one, he said, فَإِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Is it possible that somebody that is writing the Quran, that they make a typo? The answer is yes. That's why Al-Quran was mainly transmitted, the oral transmission, which is the ijazah. Okay, and the written piece of it was an aiding piece and not the main piece. And not the main piece for making sure that the Quran is never altered or edited in any shape or form. So we would mainly focus and mainly consider the ijazah and the memory over the written format. The written format, it can happen that there can be typos. And it can happen that you can find probably maybe, they'll probably find maybe a manuscript that basically had maybe a fatha, dhamma, kasra, or maybe, hey, instead of innaka anta al-aziz al-hakim, innaka anta al-ghafur rahim. But we would know, he said, laysat min al-mushaf. Yes, this would be something that you may find. And he said, this is not part of the Quran. And Al-Qadi Iyad had also mentioned it in his Shifa. We don't have any قراءة متواترة, any variant recitation, any variant قراءة off and goes back to the Prophet ﷺ and off the Prophet ﷺ, in other words, tracing back to the Prophet ﷺ, that basically has إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. In other words, it all came with al-qira'a al-mutawatira, that it is إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. Okay, so just to keep that one. And of course, it's basically to, in all of this, he's basically just reading it and teaching us that the Prophet ﷺ, ﷺ had only read it as إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. All right, the Prophet ﷺ, let's see, when he had read رَبِّ إِنَّهُنَّ أَضْلَلْنَ كَثِيرًا مِنَ النَّاسِ فَمَنْ تَبِعَنِي فَإِنَّهُ مِنِّي وَمَنْ عَصَانِي فَإِنَّكَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. قال عيسى عليه السلام إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك وإن تغفر لهم فإنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. So here's one thing. You could see that the Prophet ﷺ, in regards to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, quote, Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam said, Ya Allah, they had been going astray, and in other words, many of the people had been going astray. Whoever follows me, then he's part of me. And whoever disobeys me, you are Here it is, غفور رحيم. You are the most forgiving. Isa عليه السلام, on the other hand, he said, إن تعذبهم فإنهم عبادك. Ya Allah, if you were to punish them, they are your servants. And if you were to forgive them, إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. Unlike, for example, Prophet Ibrahim عليه السلام. Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم رفع يديه وقال اللهم أمتي. Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم rose his hands and he said, Ya Allah, my nation, and started crying. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, Ya Jibreel, O Jibreel, go to Muhammad, and your Lord knows most, and ask him, why is he crying? Jibreel comes to him and asks him, what are you crying about? So the Prophet ﷺ responds, and he knows, and he said, Ya Jibreel, and then it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically responding, O Jibreel, go to Muhammad and tell him, إِنَّا سَنُرْضِيكَ فِي أُمَّتِكَ وَلَا نَسُؤُكَ. We will make you content in regards to your nation, and we will not humiliate you. Or nasu'uk, meaning make you live in sorrow. Now, that's very similar to Surah Al-Duha. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. The end of it, وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. And your Lord Almighty will give you, and you will be فَتَرْضَى, and you will be in content. So here's the question. So إِنَّا سَنُرْضِيكَ فِي أُمَّتِكَ. What does it mean that إِنَّا سَنُرْضِيكَ فِي أُمَّتِكَ? Does that mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to just forgive all the ummah? Or what does that really mean? So, إِنَّا سَنُرْضِيكَ فِي أُمَّتِكَ, those that had really followed the right path. وَلَا نَسُؤُكَ, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to give him that intercession. لَا نَسُؤُكَ, and that's when he had made the dua. And certainly, then there comes the response. What does it mean? قَالَ هَذَا يَوْمُ يَنْفَعُ الصَّادِقِينَ صِدْقُهُم. This is the day that those that had lived as-sidq, those that had lived honesty, those that had lived the commitment in this dunya, as certainly, as for al-akhirah, is-sidq, honesty, is the only thing that's going to come in their favor. So their honesty, their commitment, remember the commitment in this dunya is basically what's going to pay off on Judgment Day, and certainly what will come in their favor on Judgment Day, which is what would come in basically giving them the reward. The commitment in this dunya is going to pay off in al-akhirah. And then it was also said, صِدْقُهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ, that on Judgment Day, some scholars said that هَذَا يَوْمُ يَنْفَعُ الصَّادِقِينَ صِدْقُهُمْ, this is talking about Judgment Day. You have to be honest because there's no lying. Why? There's no way that you can lie about it, because your thigh is going to be given the capacity to speak. Your hands are going to be speaking. Your mouth is going to be speaking on its own. There's no running away. هذا يوم ينفع الصادقين صدقهم. There's no way. It's all about honesty because you had been completely exposed. And وذلك في الشهادة لأنبيائهم بالبلاغ. ينفع الصادقين صدقهم. That day, that those that had believed, those that were honest in their commitment with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed, this is the day that it would come in their favor. Basically, those that had believed in the prophets, صدقوا برسالات الله, that they had believed in the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent, and believed in their prophets. And therefore, they basically were committed to that message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent. So therefore, what do they get? لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارِ. Therefore, what they will be getting is basically لَهُمْ جَنَّات. They would be getting the jannat, those gardens where the rivers would be flowing from underneath them. There's nothing more beautiful than, of course, water, and water flowing from underneath the beautiful gardens and all of that. Nothing dearer than that. And that's one thing that you would find, that as human beings, we tend to just find a special connection with nature, whether we're speaking about water, or whether we're speaking about the greenery, or whether we're speaking about the sound, even the sound of water, sound of birds, sound of anything in nature. It comes in as something that we feel that it is part of us. It gives us this calmness. It gives us this place of home, and certainly on Jannah, that would be the same thing. خالدين فيها أبدا. The most important thing that you would also get in Jannah, there's no death. It would be to live there eternally. There's no fear of death, no fear of losing a loved one. And that's the most important thing that you would find in Jannah, or also seeing the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also, what is it? خالدين فيها. That you would never have to worry about losing a loved one, never have to worry about death coming to you, because the biggest fear for anybody that basically probably was successful in this dunya, probably a millionaire, billionaire, you can get all the money, is that you recognize that death is inevitable. There's no running away from it. And that one day, there's no way that you can basically just reject it. It's the truth that will overcome you. And it's basically Subhana alladhi qahara ibadahu bil-maut. The other piece, radiyallahu anhum wa radu anhu. Radiyallahu anhum, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content over them. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself is basically the one. Radiyallahu anhum, he's content over them. And because he's content over them, they're also content of all the different things that they were given in reward. ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. And that's basically the best success that anybody can get, and certainly in the end. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes the surah, لِلَّهِ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا فِيهِنْ. For the Lord Almighty belongs the ownership of the heavens and the earth and everything that is basically within them. وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And he's capable of doing everything that he wills to do, and no one's will goes beyond the Lord Almighty. End of our surah. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك.
Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillah.
This is the end of Surah Al-Ma'ida. ربي يحفظكم جميعا. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. So, Alhamdulillah, Surah Al-Ma'ida, it took us 125 different sessions to do Surah Al-Ma'ida.
Subhanallah.
125 different sessions. Some sessions were 2 hours long, an hour and a half, and within that time frame. And that was after doing the summary, by the way. There's always more to say. But alhamdulillah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ya Rabbi, for those that had been present, and for those that are listening to the recording, and for those that probably are listening to us even after our death, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this be as يَوْمَ يَنْفَعُ الصَّادِقِينَ صِدْقُهُمْ. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this as what would be coming in on Judgment Day. يَنْفَعُ الصَّادِقِينَ صِدْقُهُمْ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا أَبَدًا رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْعَظِيمُ. Allahumma fashhad. Ya Allah, make this be our ending with لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ خالدين فيها أبدا رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه ذلك الفوز العظيم. Ya Allah, we had believed in you. Ya Allah, we had confessed and we had attempted and put in the efforts to submit to you, Lord Almighty. Ya Allah, keep us steadfast. Ya Allah, make us from those that submit to you, and make us from those that would be committed till their death to your principles. And Ya Allah, grant us and make us amongst those that would be granted the Jannatun tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, and make us from those that would be getting that. And نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى الصدق، نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى الإخلاص، نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى الثبات، نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى that Allah سبحانه وتعالى would give us الإيمان. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to, inshallah, to answer them.
SubhanAllah.
Alhamdulillah. So this is it, inshallah. I don't know if I should start Surah Al-Ma'ida, at least during Ramadan, or whether we should wait.